For 3 years, she served meatloaf and mashed potatoes to Special Forces operators who never looked twice at the quiet blonde behind the cafeteria counter. They called her Kitchen Lady, joked about her perfect portions, never bothered learning her name, until the day a medical emergency struck the base and Dr. Alexandra Sterling rolled up her sleeves, revealing scars that made the colonel's blood run cold. Welcome to Secrets Never Told. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden expertise and second chances, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who serve in ways we never see. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Bragg as the cafeteria filled with the familiar sounds of military breakfast service. Steam rose from industrial warming trays filled with scrambled eggs, bacon, and hash browns that would fuel another day of elite training. Behind the serving counter, Dr. Alexandra Sterling moved with quiet efficiency, her blonde hair neatly contained under a regulation hairnet, blue apron tied securely around her slender frame. At 34, Lexi had perfected the art of invisibility. Her cornflower blue eyes remained downcast as she ladled portions onto trays, her movements precise but unremarkable. To the hundreds of Special Forces operators, rangers, and support personnel who passed through her line each day, she was simply part of the infrastructure, as essential and forgettable as the coffee machines or bulletin boards. "Morning, Kitchen Lady," Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez said, sliding his tray across the counter with barely a glance in her direction. "Extra bacon today, yeah." Lexi nodded silently, adding 2 strips to his plate. She'd been serving Marcus his breakfast for 847 days. Not that anyone was counting. He liked his eggs over easy, his coffee black, and his bacon crispy. She knew the dietary preferences of nearly every operator on base, though none of them had ever asked her name. "You see that new blonde working the line?" Private Johnson whispered to his teammate as they collected their food. "Not bad looking under all that cafeteria gear." "Forget it, man," Corporal Davis replied. "That's just Lexi. Been here forever. Probably some army wife whose husband got reassigned. These civilian contractors never last long anyway." Lexi heard every word but gave no indication. She'd heard variations of the same conversation hundreds of times. To these elite soldiers, she was invisible, a non-entity who existed only to serve their meals and clean their tables. "Hey, lunch lady," called out Captain Jake Morrison, a cocky Delta Force operator known for his aggressive humor. "Think you could actually fill my plate this time? I'm not on some diet like you civilians." A few other operators chuckled as Morrison held out his tray expectantly. Lexi calmly added an extra serving of hash browns without meeting his eyes. "There we go," Morrison continued, playing to his audience. "Maybe if you ate some of this food yourself, you'd have some muscle on those skinny arms." More laughter rippled through the line. Lexi's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her expression remained neutral. She'd endured worse mockery in places where words were the least dangerous thing being thrown at her. "That's enough, Morrison," said Master Sergeant Tom Anderson, an older operator with kind eyes and graying temples. He was one of the few who treated Lexi with basic courtesy. "Morning, ma'am." He nodded to her respectfully. "Good morning, Sergeant," Lexi replied quietly, her voice carrying a slight trace of something, education perhaps, or authority carefully suppressed. She served his usual, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, fresh fruit. "How long you been working here now?" Anderson asked, genuinely curious. 3 years next month," she answered, still not meeting his eyes. "Well, I appreciate what you do. Good food, always consistent. That matters more than some people realize." For just a moment, Lexi's professional mask slipped, and Anderson caught a glimpse of something deeper: intelligence, experience, maybe even gratitude for his simple kindness. After the breakfast rush, Lexi began her cleaning routine. The cafeteria had to be spotless before lunch service began at 1100 hours. She moved systematically through the dining area, wiping tables, mopping floors, restocking condiment stations. Her movements were economical and thorough, the kind of efficiency that spoke of someone accustomed to working under time pressure. In the kitchen, she worked alongside Rosa Martinez, the head cook, and 2 other civilian contractors. Rosa was the only person on base who knew even basic details about Lexi's life outside work. "You've been quiet today, mija," Rosa said, stirring a massive pot of chili. "Those pendejos giving you trouble again?" "It's nothing new," Lexi replied, scrubbing a serving tray with focused intensity. "You don't have to take that shit, you know. You could report them." Lexi looked up for the first time all morning, meeting Rosa's concerned gaze. "And say what? That soldiers made jokes about my portion sizes? They're not wrong. I am just kitchen staff." But Rosa had worked with Lexi long enough to notice things others missed. The way she automatically checked expiration dates with a precision that went beyond food safety protocols. How she instinctively knew knew when someone was running a fever before they did. The careful way she handled sharp objects, not with fear, but with the respect of someone who understood their potential. Most telling was what happened 6 months ago when Rosa had severely burned her hand on a steam valve. Instead of calling for a medic, Lexi had immediately taken charge, cleaning the wound, applying burn gel, and bandaging it with techniques that seemed far too advanced for someone whose only medical training should have been basic food service first aid. "You sure you never worked in a hospital before this?" Rosa had asked afterward. "No," Lexi had replied, but her eyes had carried the weight of unspoken history. At 10:47 hours, the routine of Fort Bragg's morning was shattered by the piercing wail of the base alarm system. Not a drill. The pattern was wrong. Too urgent. Too sustained. Through the cafeteria windows, Lexi watched soldiers running toward the training complex, their casual morning demeanor replaced by focused urgency. "What's happening?" Rosa asked, craning to see out the window. Lexi was already untying her apron, her entire posture changing as instincts honed by years of crisis response kicked in. "Training accident," she said, moving toward the door with sudden purpose. "Sounds bad. Where you going?" "We got lunch prep." "Stay here," Lexi called over her shoulder, already pushing through the cafeteria doors. Outside, chaos was unfolding on the training grounds. A helicopter had made an emergency landing after suffering what appeared to be mechanical failure during a live fire exercise. Black smoke poured from the aircraft's engine compartment, and she could see figures on the ground, some moving, some not. Lexi ran toward the scene, her 3 years of carefully maintained invisibility evaporating as muscle memory took over. She'd covered perhaps 50 yards when the first explosion rocked the aircraft, the fuel tanks. Someone screamed. Base personnel were already responding. Fire teams, MPs, medical personnel. But in those critical first minutes of any disaster, every second counted. Lexi arrived at the perimeter just as the base medics were setting up their triage area, 75 yards from the burning helicopter. "Too far," she muttered, assessing the scene with eyes that had evaluated countless battlefields. "They'll never get the worst cases stabilized at this distance." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez lay on the ground 30 yards from the aircraft, clearly unconscious, blood pooling beneath his head. 2 other operators were trying to drag him to safety, but one of them was limping badly, and the other kept stopping to shield his eyes from the smoke. Without conscious thought, Lexi vaulted the security perimeter and sprinted toward the downed soldier. Behind her, she heard someone shouting for her to get back, but the voice seemed to come from very far away. She dropped to her knees beside Rodriguez, her hands immediately going to his neck to check for a pulse while her eyes assessed his injuries. Strong pulse, but rapid and thready. Head trauma with significant bleeding, possible spinal injury, signs of shock setting in. "Hey!" one of the operators yelled at her. "Lady, you can't be here. This is a restricted area." Lexi ignored him completely, her focus entirely on the wounded man before her. She needed to stop the bleeding, stabilize his neck, and get him moved to proper medical care. But first, she needed supplies. "You," she said sharply, pointing at the nearest soldier. "I need your first aid kit, now." Something in her tone made him comply without question. As he handed over the kit, Lexi was already assessing Rodriguez's head wound, her fingers probing with the practiced confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times under worse conditions. "Compound skull fracture," she murmured to herself, opening the medical kit. "Subdural bleeding probable. Need immediate evacuation." The soldier stared at her. "How do you get me something to stabilize his neck?" A board. Anything rigid. Her voice carried absolute authority now, the carefully maintained submissiveness of the cafeteria worker completely gone as she worked to control Rodriguez's bleeding, applying pressure with techniques that went far beyond basic first aid. More personnel arrived at the scene. Among them was Colonel James Patterson, the base commander, who took one look at the civilian woman performing what appeared to be field surgery and started forward angrily. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Who authorized civilian personnel in the hot zone?" Lexi didn't look up from her patient. "Colonel, I need you to clear a path for immediate medevac. This man has maybe 10 minutes before brain swelling becomes irreversible." Patterson froze, not just because a cafeteria worker was giving him orders, but because of how she'd given them. The tone, the terminology, the absolute confidence in her medical assessment. None of it fit with her supposed background. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from—" "No." Lexi finally looked up, and Patterson found himself staring into eyes that held depths of experience he hadn't expected. "I know what I'm doing, and right now, I'm the best chance he has." She returned her attention to Rodriguez, carefully positioning his head while maintaining spinal alignment. Her movements were precise, economical, betraying years of trauma training that had nothing to do with food service. "Someone get me a radio," she called out. "I need to talk to whoever's receiving this patient. They need to be prepared for immediate neurosurgery." One of the base medics, Staff Sergeant Williams, had been watching her work with growing amazement. He He'd completed 2 tours as a combat medic and recognized expertise when he saw it. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "what's your medical background?" For just a moment, Lexi hesitated. 3 years of carefully constructed anonymity hung in the balance. Then Rodriguez's pulse began to weaken under her fingers, and the decision made itself. "Combat trauma surgeon," she said simply. 8 years, multiple deployments. Now can we please get this man some proper medical care? The words hit the assembled personnel like a physical blow. Colonel Patterson stared at her as if seeing a ghost. "That's impossible," he said slowly. "You're Alexandra Sterling. You work in our cafeteria?" "Yes," Lexi replied, maintaining pressure on Rodriguez's wound while signaling for a stretcher. "And 3 years ago, I was Dr. Alexandra Sterling, trauma surgeon attached to Delta Force Medical Support Unit, rank of Major. Now, can we discuss my resume after we save his life?" The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of approaching helicopter rotors as the medevac team prepared to land. But Colonel Patterson wasn't finished processing this revelation. "Major Alexandra Sterling," he repeated slowly, and suddenly his face went pale. "The Alexandra Sterling from Operation Nightfall." Lexi's hand stilled for just a moment. "You know about Nightfall?" "Jesus Christ," Patterson whispered. "You're Miracle 6. The nickname hit her like a physical blow. Miracle 6, the surgeon who'd kept 6 critically wounded operators alive during a 14-hour siege in Afghanistan, performing surgery by flashlight in a cave while under constant enemy fire. The mission was classified, but in certain circles, the legend had grown. Other personnel were gathering now, drawn by the commotion and the increasingly obvious fact that their quiet cafeteria worker was performing medical procedures that required years of specialized training. Among them was Master Sergeant Anderson, who stood watching with dawning understanding. "That's why you knew about my medication," he said quietly. Lexi glanced at him while continuing to monitor Rodriguez's vital signs. 6 months ago, Anderson had mentioned feeling dizzy during breakfast service. She'd quietly suggested he have his blood pressure checked and avoid caffeine for a few days. The base doctor later confirmed he was developing hypertension. "You've been watching out for us," Anderson continued. "All this time, the way you serve food, checking if someone's eating enough, eating too much, looking sick. You weren't just serving breakfast." "I was doing my job," Lexi said firmly, but her voice was gentler now. The medevac helicopter touched down, and immediately the professional medical team took over Rodriguez's care. But as they prepared to transfer him, the lead flight medic paused to speak with Lexi. "Outstanding field work," he said professionally. "That pressure dressing probably saved his life. What's your background?" Before Lexi could answer, Colonel Patterson stepped forward. "Captain, meet Major Alexandra Sterling, call sign Miracle 6. The flight medic's eyes widened. Every combat medic in the military knew that call sign, even if they didn't know the classified details behind it. "Holy shit," he breathed. "Ma'am, it's an honor." As the medevac lifted off with Rodriguez stable but critical, the crowd of personnel who had witnessed the incident began to disperse, but word was already spreading through the base like wildfire. The quiet blonde woman who served their meals was Major Alexandra Sterling, one of the most decorated trauma surgeons in military history. Colonel Patterson lingered as the scene cleared, studying Lexi with new eyes. She was attempting to clean blood from her hands with a towel someone had given her, and for the first time in 3 years, she looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Major," Patterson said formally. "It's just Lexi," she replied. "I'm not active duty anymore." "Why?" The question came out more bluntly than he'd intended. "Why are you working in our cafeteria when you could be running a trauma center anywhere in the country?" Lexi was quiet for a long moment, staring at the blood-stained towel in her hands. "Because trauma centers don't usually come under mortar fire, Colonel. And after 8 years of that, I thought I might like to serve people in a way that didn't involve cutting them open." "But you just—" "I know what I just did." Her voice carried a note of resignation. "And I'd do it again. But that doesn't mean I want to go back to being responsible for life and death decisions every day." Patterson studied her carefully. "Is that really why you left? Or is there more to the story?" Lexi met his gaze directly for the first time. "There's always more to the story, Colonel. But some stories are classified above both our pay grade." 2 hours later, word came back from the hospital that Rodriguez was stable and expected to make a full recovery. The news spread quickly through the base, along with increasingly detailed accounts of how the cafeteria worker had saved his life with medical skills that seemed to come from nowhere. Lexi returned to the kitchen to help with lunch preparation, hoping to slip back into her routine of invisibility. But when she entered the cafeteria, she found it wasn't going to be that simple. The lunch rush was different now. Instead of sliding past her without acknowledgement, soldiers were making eye contact, nodding respectfully, some even thanking her by name, a name they'd somehow learned despite 3 years of indifference. "Ma'am," said Private Johnson, the same soldier who'd been discussing her appearance that morning, "I wanted to thank thank you for what you did for Rodriguez. He's got kids, you know." "I know," Lexi replied quietly. She knew about all of their families, their deployments, their concerns. She'd been listening for 3 years. Captain Morrison approached her station with obvious discomfort. The cocky Delta Force operator who'd mocked her that morning now seemed uncertain how to interact with someone whose military credentials apparently exceeded his own. "Major," he began awkwardly. "It's Lexi," she corrected, serving his usual lunch portion without being asked. "Right, Lexi." He struggled for words. "I owe you an apology. The way I spoke to you this morning and, well, pretty much every morning for the past 3 years, it was inappropriate." "You treated me exactly as I wanted to be treated," Lexi replied. "Like I was nobody special." Morrison looked confused. "But you are special. You're a decorated combat surgeon. Why would you want people to treat you like a normal person?" Lexi finished. "Because for 3 years, that's all I wanted to be." That afternoon, Lexi was called to Colonel Patterson's office. She'd expected this conversation ever since Rodriguez's successful surgery had been confirmed. What she hadn't expected was to find a second man in the office, this one wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. "Major Sterling," Patterson said formally, "I'd like you to meet Deputy Director Marcus Cole from the Department of Defense Medical Research Command." Cole extended his hand with a slight smile. "Actually, Colonel, I believe the Major and I have met before. Afghanistan, 2019, Operation Nightfall." Lexi shook his hand carefully. "Deputy Director, I wondered when someone would come looking. You've been hard to find," Cole replied. "After you declined reassignment and refused to accept any of the positions we offered, you seemed to disappear entirely. Took us 18 months to track you to Fort Bragg." "I wasn't hiding," Lexi said. "I was working in a cafeteria," Cole observed, "when you could be running the trauma surgery program at Walter Reed, or Johns Hopkins, or developing new field medical protocols, or training the next generation of combat surgeons." Lexi took a seat across from the two men, her posture straight but guarded. "I assume this isn't a social call. The department has a proposal," Cole continued. "A new program combining trauma surgery research with field medical training. You'd have your choice of assignments, full autonomy over your research, and the resources to make a real difference." "I am making a difference," Lexi replied. "Ask Staff Sergeant Rodriguez." "One soldier," Cole pressed, "when you could be developing techniques to save hundreds." Colonel Patterson leaned forward. "Major, with respect, you're wasting your talents. What you did today proved you still have the skills, the instincts. Why bury them in food service?" Lexi was quiet for several minutes, her fingers absently tracing a small scar on her left wrist, one of many that told stories she'd never shared. "Because," she said finally, "in a cafeteria, when I make someone's day better, it's because I remembered they liked their coffee black, or I gave them an extra dinner roll. Simple things, peaceful things, things that don't involve trying to put people back together after they've been blown apart." "But you're a surgeon," Cole said. "It's who you are." "No," Lexi replied firmly. "It's what I did. For 8 years, I was defined by my ability to save lives under impossible conditions. And yes, I was good at it. But that doesn't mean it's all I'm capable of being." She stood up, smoothing her apron. "Gentlemen, I appreciate the offer, but I found something here that I never had in an operating room." "What's that?" Patterson asked. "Peace." After Lexi left, Cole and Patterson sat in uncomfortable silence. "She's not coming back," Cole said finally. "No," Patterson agreed, "but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. How do you figure?" Patterson gestured toward the window, where they could see soldiers moving across the base with their usual purposeful efficiency. "Look at them. Every one of those men and women knows that if something goes wrong, if they get hurt, there's someone here who can help them. Not just the medical staff they expect, but someone they see every day. Someone who's been quietly taking care of them in ways they never realized." "The cafeteria worker." "The guardian angel," Patterson corrected. "Sometimes the most important service happens where no one's looking for it." That evening, as Lexi cleaned the cafeteria after dinner service, she found she wasn't alone. Master Sergeant Anderson sat at one of the tables, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. "Sergeant," she acknowledged, continuing her cleaning routine. "Tom," he corrected. "I think after 3 years of you knowing exactly how I like my eggs, we can use first names." Lexi smiled slightly, the first genuine smile anyone on base had seen from her in months. "Fair enough, Tom. Can I ask you something?" She nodded, continuing to wipe down tables. "Why didn't you ever say anything? All this time, you've been listening to us complain about missions, about injuries, about medical care. You could have spoken up, given advice, shared your experience." Lexi paused in her cleaning, considering the question. "Because you didn't need a surgeon, Tom. You needed someone who would listen without judgment, who would make sure you ate well, who would notice if you weren't taking care of yourself. That's not a medical officer's job. That's a friend's job." Anderson nodded slowly. "And that's what you've been all along. wrong. A friend we never knew we had. Something like that. So what happens now? Word's gotten around about who you are. Things are going to be different. Lexi resumed cleaning, but her movements had slowed. I don't know. I hope they don't have to be. They do, though, don't they? You can't go back to being invisible. Not after today. She didn't answer immediately, but Anderson could see the tension in her shoulders, the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. For what it's worth, he continued, I hope you stay. But I understand if you can't. 3 days later, Colonel Patterson received an unusual request. Major Alexandra Sterling wanted to speak with him about a possible compromise. When she entered his office, Patterson noticed she was wearing different clothes, not her cafeteria uniform, but not military dress either. Business casual, professional, but approachable. Colonel, she began without preamble, I'd like to propose a modification to my current position. Patterson gestured for her to sit. I'm listening. I want to continue working in food service, she said, but I'd also like to establish a basic medical training program for base personnel. Nothing complex. Field first aid, trauma response, basic emergency care. Things that could make a difference in those first critical minutes before professional medical help arrive. Like what you did for Rodriguez. Exactly. I'd conduct training sessions during off-duty hours, maybe 2 evenings a week. Voluntary attendance, practical skills focused. And I'd maintain my current position in the cafeteria. Patterson leaned back in his chair. Why not take the position Cole offered? Full resources, unlimited budget, chance to make changes on a national level. Because this base is my community now, Lexi replied. These are my people. I don't want to save the world anymore, Colonel. I just want to take care of the small part of it that I can see from my kitchen window. Patterson was quiet for a moment, then reached for his phone. Deputy Director Cole, it's Patterson at Bragg. I have a counter-proposal for you to consider. 2 weeks later, the first medical training session was held in the base gymnasium. Attendance was voluntary, but nearly 60 personnel showed up, including many of the soldiers who had barely acknowledged Lexi's existence just a month before. Good evening, she began, standing before the assembled group wearing BDUs with medical corps insignia, but no rank indicators. My name is Dr. Alexandra Sterling, and I'm going to teach you how to save each other's lives. For the next 2 hours, she demonstrated techniques that could mean the difference between life and death in emergency situations. Her teaching style was practical, calm, thorough, the same qualities she brought to serving breakfast, but applied to something infinitely more critical. At the end of the session, Captain Morrison approached her with a question. Ma'am, in your experience, what's the most important thing to remember in a medical emergency? Lexi considered the question carefully. That every person you're trying to help is someone's son or daughter, someone's husband or wife, someone's parent or sibling. They matter to someone, which means they should matter to you. Everything else, the techniques, the protocols, the equipment, that's all just details. 6 months later, Fort Bragg had one of the most well-trained non-medical personnel rosters in the Army. 3 separate incidents had occurred where soldiers trained in Lexi's program had provided critical care that saved lives before professional medics could arrive on scene. The cafeteria still served breakfast at 0600 hours, and Dr. Alexandra Sterling still stood behind the counter, serving meals to soldiers who now knew her name, her story, and her worth. But the dynamic had shifted in subtle ways. Morning, Doc, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said, sliding his tray across the counter. He'd made a full recovery and returned to duty with nothing more than a small scar to mark his brush with death. Morning, Marcus, Lexi replied, serving his usual breakfast. How's the head feeling today? Good as new, thanks to you. It had taken time for Lexi to accept the gratitude, the recognition, the way people looked at her now, but gradually she'd come to understand that visibility didn't have to mean losing herself. She could be both the guardian angel in the kitchen and the trauma surgeon in the training room. You know, Rodriguez continued, my kids are always asking about the lady who saved Daddy's life. They want to meet you. Maybe someday. Lexi smiled, handing him his coffee. Black, no sugar. You always remember. It's what I do. As the breakfast rush continued around them, filled with the comfortable rhythm of routine and the deeper satisfaction of service, Dr. Alexandra Sterling understood that she had found something rare in her cafeteria kitchen, a place where her past and present could coexist, where healing could happen one meal at a time, and where being extraordinary didn't require giving up the simple pleasure of taking care of people in the most basic way possible. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who choose to serve quietly, who find ways to heal the world one person at a time, who understand that saving lives doesn't always require a scalpel. Sometimes it just requires remembering how someone likes their coffee and caring enough to get it right every single day. The morning sun continued to cast its long shadows across Fort Bragg, but now they fell on a cafeteria where everyone knew that the woman behind the counter was so much more than she appeared. And for Dr. Alexandra Sterling, that was exactly how she wanted it.